those of y'all who don't know, I have Eric Campos with me today, and he's going to share a little bit about where he's at in ministry. He's been in ministry just about as long as I have. We actually kind of got saved around the same time, gave our lives to Christ around the same time. So he's been in ministry for 13 years and still going. Eric Campos, he right out of high school completed a ministry internship in Baton Rouge, Louisiana. And then he also got his associates in ministry. And after completing that schooling, he was a children's pastor for 4 years. Man, that's really it takes a good soul to start ministry.
Just been climbing up the ladder. Yeah,
dude. To start ministry as a children's pastor, that takes a good heart. And then after 4 years of doing that, he's now been a youth pastor for 5 years, going on 6, and he was recently married. How's that been, Eric? How's it been being a newlywed?
Dude, it's been good. So February, this is our second month being married, but we were dating for about 5 years, and things like that. So actually, it's very, very different, but I'm loving it. I'm loving marriage.
That's great. I feel like when I first became a youth pastor, it was like right after I got married. It's almost like that's the qualification, just so that they know that you're not a weirdo.
Yeah.
And so it's like as soon as I saw you with a girl, like, okay, he's not a creepster. Let's hire him. That's great, man. And now that you've been married, it's only been about a 2 months or so. How has that been? Do you feel like there's been a shift in how ministry feels for you now that you're married?
You know what? I do feel a whole lot more comfortable, kind of like you mentioned, you're single and definitely some people, it does kind of feel like you're the weirdo, and things like that. But now actually it feels like every time, like, hey, we're inviting people into our house, like, hey, I'm saying, hey, me and my wife's house, it's not just like my house, and things like that. So it feels way more easier to be able to talk with parents. And I just feel like it just brings such a sense of just confidence, like, hey, this guy isn't just weird and he's stalking or anything like that.
Right.
So
yeah. I think too, it just kind of brings a sense of stability. It's like even just like the traditional like marriage, traditional like nuclear family, just without saying it, it just provides us this sense of security, even when we're just like trying to trust people with our kids or anything else.
Yeah,
that's great, man. Let's get right into it. You've been in ministry. I feel like you have a good scope as far as like being in different types of churches. You were at a church a non-denominational church in Baton Rouge for so long, completely different culture to what you were used to. You're more so like raised within the Hispanic Latino culture, and then Baton Rouge, I don't even know what kind of culture that church was, but is more of like a mix of Anglo and Black culture. How was that transition for you, going from the Hispanic culture shift to that different church culture?
Man, it was definitely a whole lot more different. I just love the thing about Baton Rouge. Just there was so much variety and so much to do, and there's all these different opportunities. But then coming back to Del Rio, it was not a culture shock, but it was just kind of weird because I just felt like everything just got slammed on the brakes. Like there was all this variety of things to do, and then you come to Del Rio, and it's just like, okay, what do I do? I really didn't have anything really to do that much because it just really didn't have. Del Rio is a small border city. And if you go to our malls, everything is closed. There's not really varieties to do anything here.
Right.
And so it's very challenging to just kind of like work within being in kids ministry. I feel like Del Rio is more kids ministry oriented than youth ministry oriented. And so for me, kind of transitioning into youth ministry was just like, man, like, where is things for the youth? There's like such a big gap. Like our summers are full of just kids ministry, VBSs, and all these different things, sports activities. But then youth, there's like, okay, what's going on? But it's very challenging still. You don't have like the variety of mentors and friends and you do in a smaller city because everything's kind of just like, man, it's just like almost like a desert, dude. And things like that.
Yeah, I never even really thought about that. Did you ever feel like a sense of almost like discouragement going from the church you were serving at in Louisiana was thousands of people, and then you come to start doing children's ministry in a church with only a couple hundred people. What was that like for you? Do you feel like it was you feel like kind of deflated? Did you feel motivated at the smaller crowd? What was that like?
I felt coming back, I was motivated. Like, man, I'm gonna be the blessing to the city and everything like that. But then I felt like over a season, the balloon just popped, and I'm like, what am I doing? Because there's just so much things where it's just, I'm like, man, like the kids ministry was growing and things like that. And then out of nowhere, just such a small city, people start saying things and like, oh man, I don't like this about this. And they just start leaving and things like that. And so it did start getting a little discouraging for a little bit, because I'm like, man, it's such a small city. I think everybody's desire is, what I always reference it to, I think who it was, man, who was it? He was from the tribe of Benjamin, and he was the smallest of the clans. And I always felt like, man, like what can God do in such a small city? Because you see all these different types of people where it's just like, man, everything is bigger and it's better. And when you come from a smaller city, it's just like, what am I supposed to do when your options are few? And so it was really kind of discouraging for a season, because I'm like, man, I see all these people doing all these things on Instagram and all that stuff. And then I'm like, man, what about it here? Again, we hardly have anything, but we're always striving to do more things for the youth.
Yeah. I think you touched on something really unique too. I think a lot of young leaders, when they go into ministry, they're almost like really caught off guard and blasted with the surprise of kind of like church politics, and even like just the idea of like, oh, well, we're doing an event, and you think like, oh, this is great. Everyone would support this event that we're trying, we're just trying to do our best. And then you realize that people just simply disagree with you. Or like, I remember a time even just doing like a time a church was doing like a Christmas parade, and people were pissed that they were wearing Santa hats. And it's like, you don't necessarily, as a young leader, you don't expect the things for people to be mad about. How did you overcome that early on and even now?
Man, that is such a great question. The way to overcome that, I feel, as I was just thinking, I was like, man, I felt like early on, I just remember in one of our last classes of the Ministry Training Institute, and one thing that somebody said, and it really caught on to me, was because when you go back and you serve in your church, one thing that really stayed with me is don't get offended. And for me, like, I know it's just so, like, it's so easier said than done, but learning the power of forgiveness and knowing that people are broken and people are hurting, and that doesn't mean that I have to be my response has to be the same as well. So I had to learn how to forgive people who make me feel like, man, like, great question of a Christmas parade. We had this great idea, hey, we want to do this Christmas parade. And it's funny that you said that, because it happened with me too when I was in kids ministry. And I was like, we're going to do this, we're going to do that. And then some lady out of maybe like 30 parents was like, well, what about Jesus? And I was like, and it like completely, the whole room just felt like it sank on me. And I was like, man, why did she have to say that? But learning how to forgive people has probably been one of the most biggest things that I've had to learn living in a small border city, because we live in a moment where it's opinion oriented and things like that. But I felt like that really helped me to understand that I don't know what they're going through, but I can choose to respond out of forgiveness and saying, you know what, hey, what you said to me doesn't mean that makes me have to feel discouraged or hurt.
Wow, that's so good. I love how you bring it to this place of trying to not take it personal. And just like knowing that each person is just like, they're only seeing one way at the time. And even like that scenario saying like, what about Jesus? Like the whole thing is for Jesus. Like everything we're doing is for Jesus. What do you need? And it's funny how it feels like you have to constantly say certain things that don't necessarily have to be said sometimes. In order to cater to those almost who are more so trying to hold on. It almost feels like hold on to a sense of superiority. Like I
Yeah.
thought about this more than anybody else. Like that's what
Yeah.
I feel like sometimes the way people think is like they're
Yeah.
trying to find something. And I feel like how you described it was like not taking it personal. That's like really
Yeah.
key into being able to still minister to people. Because I remember the
Yeah.
first time I had like an obstacle like that. And honestly, I mean, honestly, the first, I remember just critically thinking about it for a moment. Again, I was new to Christ and was
Yeah.
never raised in church, but remember the first time that I had a real like problematic meeting and someone stepped out of the room and I started, and they were about to come back in. I thought, as soon as I get back in, this will solve everything. I'm going to get up and I'm going to deck them right in the mouth. I'm going to just punch them as hard as I could and knock them out. And then
That's how
everyone,
sometimes
I
you want
think
to
that will,
respond.
I was like, that will fix everything. And I genuinely thought that. I said, some people just need to get beat up one time. But that's thank God that the Holy Spirit revealed to me that would only make people feel confirmed in
Yeah.
any negative thought they had. You know, that leads me to ask, when it comes to trying to not take things personal, and when it comes to even there's so much exchange. And again, I feel like a lot of young leaders are surprised when they go into ministry and they've had like all this time on their own before entering ministry to think
Yeah.
of their best ideas, and then they get into ministry and they realize either that idea has already been tried before, or
Mm.
not everyone thinks it's a great idea, or that it's going to just like, oh well, we'll think about it, we're going to wait on that. And there's so much, there's almost like like how you described at the beginning, like a dead stop, when
Yeah.
you feel like you are so ambitious and so ready to go. And for you personally, I feel like you're one of the most loyal people I know. Like you are so loyal to what you are a part of, whatever
Yeah.
church you're a part of. Even when you feel like you disagree with something, you don't voice it. You're such a loyal person.
Yeah.
How do you navigate that loyalty within yourself or within your team? How do you overcome like even personal discouragement while
Yeah.
still being loyal? I know that's a big question,
Yeah.
but
No. What comes to mind is I'm a big person who I need to know, and I always pray, God, what is the season that I'm in? Because for
That's
me,
great.
I feel like knowing my season of where I'm in, like I know I've shared with you a couple times behind the scenes of like, hey, this is where I really feel like our last year here, because like I just really feel in these moments where when I feel like times are getting tough, I know that those aren't um how would I say it? Because what comes to mind is like, hey, I'm not doing it for man, I'm doing it for God. And I know for me
That's
in
great.
this season, in this moment of when I feel like I'm getting challenged in different aspects, I know that there's one thing, for instance, kids and youth ministry. I was able to share this with a couple of our students last week, that there's times where I do get discouraged of working in youth ministry because our youth ministry is going through this crazy transition of after COVID, we have 50, 60 kids, and then it just immediately dropped to 15 to 20. And
Yeah.
so that's discouraging. And you're feeling, okay, well, God, do I need to change my season? No. But the biggest thing that I really feel in the moment is when I felt in that moment, I just felt like what God is speaking to me is that God does his best work with a few than he does with the masses. Because if you look
That's
at
good.
John chapter 4, it talked about the woman, Jesus with a Samaritan woman, Jesus wanting some water from a well. And then, long story short, you can check it out for yourself, is Jesus told her the whole story of her life. And a few verses later, in verse 39, it says, many Samaritans believed because of what Jesus told her story. And I feel like because of that, I've had to learn to be faithful with a little that I have, and just to say, you know what, I'm not here because somebody else tells me. I'm here because God has told me to be here, because I have an assignment and I want to learn. I want to be able to say and go to heaven that, you know what, I was good and faithful, because I feel like we live in a time where, man, if we have a little, then we're sucking at life. We're not.
Yeah.
It's about handling and being faithful with a few, and just really taking that moment and say, you know what, God, I remember growing up from a broken home, and I just really felt, and I even shared this with my students last week, was I want to be a better father than the way that my father fathered me. because I stay because I want to be able to be a consistent person who's speaking life into them, because if not, who else? So I know
That's
for
good.
me in that season right now that I'm in is I'm going to be faithful and I'm going to pour my heart out and continue to go until the Lord tells me otherwise.
That's so good, Eric. And I feel like what you're describing too is just like having the right heart going into ministry.
Correct.
And I feel like there's a mix of motivation when it comes to young leaders who have this ambition to be a leader in ministry or whatever
Yeah.
capacity. And sometimes that ambition is more so motivated by everyone should hear what I have to say.
Yeah.
I could say that better. It's like it's more of a me focus rather than
Correct.
how can I serve focus. And
Correct.
and I've seen so many times, like even when I was a youth pastor, there'd be like countless times where someone would come and say, "Oh, I love working with students. I have such a passion for the youth, and I think I have a great message to share." And I would just
Mm,
respond saying, "Oh, thanks for the enthusiasm. I'm so glad you're
yeah.
passionate. Can you help set up chairs?" And like that would last like 1 to 3 times, not
Yeah.
much longer than that, and they would stop coming because their heart wasn't to serve the ministry, their heart was to serve themselves.
Yeah.
And I feel like so many people, it's not that they're have these wicked hearts, but they have
Correct.
their motivations in the wrong place. And
Yeah.
it just takes a, I mean, there's just like you're saying, there's so many times where you may have the greatest message, but you're not going
Yeah.
to feel great when you only have two people show up. When you have
Yeah.
half of what the last person had, it feels very discouraging. And
Yeah.
so a lot of people, they get that, and then they look around like, well, this isn't what I thought, and then they bail on ministry. And
Mhm.
there's so much potential within them
Yeah.
if they would have
Correct.
caught the right heart at the beginning. And I think that's so key to what you're saying, is having the right heart at the beginning. It's not just
Yeah.
to keep you out forever. It's just so that
Yeah.
you can endure in the moments that you're going to struggle in ministry.
Correct.
That's so good. I love how you said that.
And if
Um,
there's anything I can share, um, one thing for me too that really helps for me is I think it was in 2020 in youth ministry, I began to apply a verse for me was John 3:30, one of my favorite verses anytime that I get to speak, because I I do this as a heart check for me. It says in John 3:30, it's necessary for him to increase and for me to diminish. So when I go up and I speak or anything, is it the ambition? Is it for me or is it for Jesus? Who do I want people to see reflected in my life? And I think a lot of the times I'm a failure in that too, of doing a youth ministry. I want people to hear my messages. I want people to hear what I have to say. And I begin to see students as numbers and not as names and souls. And I think that
that's
that is
good.
important for young leaders to have that understanding that these, let's just say Gen Z or the young, the youth, they want to build and establish community. They don't want to just come and just hear you speak. They
Yeah,
want to see them be able to be implemented. They want to hear others their age speak. I think we live in that time where we have to empower other people and not everything's about you. And I think that
yeah,
that's kind of just operating out of a heart of humility, because that's what ministry is. It's service. It's not
yeah.
look at me, it's service.
Yeah, that's so good, and that requires, just like you said in that verse, a death to self. And
Yeah.
I think about two things. I think about one of how often you have to die to yourself when you don't feel like showing up that day. Like at the beginning, when you're given the first chance to
Real.
speak, it's like you'd move heaven and earth to get there and use the microphone. But then after doing it for a while, it loses that little bit of luster, and all of a sudden you just
Yeah.
have a bad day, and you just don't feel like speaking, you don't feel like ministering, or you get
Yeah.
sick, or you just like you had a late night and you're tired, or you're just in a bad
Yeah.
mood, and there's so many things that come up. And when you don't have that heart check, you don't show up. And then I've
Yeah.
seen it time and time again, people who don't show up, and people's faith are damaged by it. And
Correct.
the second thing that I think about when you talk about this death to self is, I feel like the speaking part of ministry, the face of ministry that we give, is like so minuscule. It's less than 20%. And the other 80% is really about just practical service of people. And are you talking about like servicing like in the way of like providing community? Like
Yeah.
that is not necessarily an elegant thing to do. It's not a pretty thing. Like the
Yeah.
stage, it may seem pretty at times, besides what happens in the preparation of for the
Yeah.
stage. But the part of like trying to delegate community, and what I've seen with you is that you're really good at like taking people within your group and delegating authority and helping them to be
Yeah.
extensions of, in a sense, like shepherding the
Yeah.
people, to where it's not just about you. You're literally using other people so that so that no one gets left out from the sense of
Yeah.
community. And that's such a powerful aspect of leadership that goes overlooked, is like the simple aspect of organizing, delegating people, and
Yeah.
allowing them to be extensions of Christ, or even extensions of yourself, without you getting any credit for it. And so that's, I love that. That's beautiful, man. um it makes me think, when you're deciding, when you're looking at people, because I've known you to, you're really good at choosing people to start kind of banding arms with, and serving and volunteering within ministry. What characteristics or skills would you suggest for someone to look for, or what characteristics or skills? Maybe there's someone listening to this and they're like at ground zero, and they're just
Mm.
now starting to have a heart for leadership, or like they want to be a part of the volunteer team,
Mm.
and they're trying to just kind of like figure things out. What characteristics or skills would you suggest them to focus on in this moment of
Mm.
their life to move ahead?
Man, what comes to mind is, man, I just had this conversation with somebody else maybe a couple weeks ago, and I would choose heart over talent any day.
Mm,
um, because I feel like a lot of times we can have people with these amazing giftings, they can influence people and crowds, but you treat them the wrong way and they'll bail with everybody that they
yeah,
influenced. So for me, I'm always checking their heart. Hey, how's everything going? I want that from them. I look for teachability. Hey, are they teachable? Are they hungry? Right now, again, kind of like our youth ministries in this crazy transition where you don't know how hard it is to delegate and empower people, because I'm a really great person where like I got the ball and I'm running with it and I'm better by myself. So it's a really big discipline for me to do
yeah,
that and really empower others. So again, I just think the biggest thing, if I could share, was choose heart over talent. Really
yeah,
have people who have your heart, who want your heart. So like anytime when I'm talking to people who want to join the youth ministry, I look for four things. The very first one, part of who we are in our values, we value community. We believe that we're better together, not meant to do life alone. So I want people to exemplify, how are you making people feel welcome and known in community? The
yeah,
second one is discipleship. We value, hey, it's okay to not be okay, but not okay to stay there. We want to create a healthy environment or community for students so that it's going to open up their heart for us to really just kind of help and share with them. So I want people to say, hey, can you love people? That's another
yeah,
thing. And the third one is empowerment. Hey, we want to empower and mobilize this generation into ministry. Hey, how are you empowering people? And the last aspect is fun. We want people to have fun. Are you fun? Because I think that that's
yeah,
something for me that I always look for is, hey, can you have people feel welcome and known? You're not just showing up just because it's a duty. I want it to be create a space for ministry that it is a delight and that people love.
yeah. That's so good, Eric. And it's like, I like how you bring in really the core values of your ministry is what
Yeah,
defines like who you want to help lead it. It's like people who
yeah,
exemplify these qualities. And I feel like a lot of ministries, when they like they kind of like slap on core values and don't ever think about them again. Like it's
yeah,
like, I don't know how many ministries I've been a part of or I've seen where it's like excellence is a core value and everything is done like real sloppy. Like it's like so
yeah,
sloppy. You'd never really think that excellence is something that they strive for. And it was more so that what I found is like when people put excellence, it's more so that they want to appear to have their stuff
hmm,
together. But
correct,
real excellence is done in the in between, is like done in the
correct,
details. It's produced in excellence. And so as you like make your core values, it's like you could tell that it's a part of who you are. And I think
Big
that
time.
really gives a great example for like any young leader if they're
Yeah.
thinking about like, well, how can I get even like noticed in my church? I don't go to a small church, I go to a big church, and I've been showing up and I don't really know how to, in a sense, get like I don't know what they want. And what you're
Yeah.
showing is like, man, we're really looking for people who exemplify what we believe in, who exemplify these
Yeah.
values.
Yeah.
And I think you said it best that you choose heart over talent any day. And even for myself, I think about like after 13 years, I feel like there's certain things that have risen to the top. You know, it's like you go through these
Yeah.
fires in ministry, and you start off with uh, things that you think are important. Like I started off where I thought that at the beginning, I thought one of the biggest qualities was competence. And I feel like now it's like competence can be taught. Like that, it's not as important to me. And like for me
Yeah.
personally, like the three qualities I think of that are so important are is like you said, heart. I would use the word even loyalty, like loyalty
Yeah.
to the
Big
vision
time.
of the church, loyalty to the people you're serving. Like loyalty is so important. The second thing I would put is even having a emotional maturity, or even like I
Yeah.
would
Big
make it a
time.
synonym of like teachability. And it's just like all the volunteers I've had over the years, or all the people that I've even like, I feel like the people I poured into the most ended up bailing. And then the people that I feel like I would just almost like give like scraps to when it came to my leadership, they were
Mm.
often the most grateful. And so I had
Yeah.
my interests or what I was focusing on flipped to where the best was, it's like the scripture Jesus uses, you throwing your
Yeah.
pearls to pigs and you're giving
Yeah.
like the best of you to people who are going to trample over it. And that's why it's
Yeah.
so important to have these qualities. Um, and like emotional maturity, being able to even like
Yeah.
gently humbly tell somebody like, hey, this was wrong here, we need to work on that, and
Yeah.
them not bail and leave you for it. Like I don't
Yeah.
know how many times I've happened where I was like in shock and surprise, like wow, like I thought that they had the emotional maturity to be able to
Yeah.
handle like a friendly relationship as well as like a leadership relationship,
Yeah.
and they simply didn't. And so again, I really resonate with you in these like qualities that you're describing. Um, it how about this? What would be, for someone just starting out, what would be one question that you wish you would have asked earlier at the beginning of ministry? What's one question that
Man.
you wish you would have asked?
Um, man, that's a
I
great
know.
question. Um, One question I would have asked, man, I wish I would have asked, I guess myself, or man, not to take myself so seriously,
That's so
because like
good.
I feel like for me as a person, the reason why I say don't take yourself so seriously, because I feel like a lot of the times leading in ministry, I feel one thing that God has been really speaking into my heart was my worth is not my work. Because
Hmm.
I feel like a lot of the times we attach our worth to our work. Well, if let's just say my ministry's small, I don't have the highest numbers in attendance like the other church down the road. We feel like, well, then I'm a failure, and I'm just not doing something right. But my worth isn't attached to that. My worth comes from knowing who Jesus says that I am, not what man says. And I feel like that
Yeah.
is so important for young people and leaders. Myself, I'm still learning this, is knowing that, hey, I can be confident in my calling and who God's calling me to be. It's really funny that you've been asking me this too, because it was a couple days ago, I saw this maybe 10, 13-year-old kid, and he was preaching with so much like anointing and with confidence. And I was like, dude, look at this kid go. And
It
I
was
felt
like a
like that
TikTok
moment,
video, right? Like some
yeah,
little kid.
yeah. And God spoke to me through that moment. I'm like, this kid has two things. He has confidence and he has calling. And I think a lot of leaders have calling, but they don't have confidence.
Yeah.
And for me, that's the thing. I feel like when you put confidence and calling together, there's something that powerful that begins to happen as us as leaders. And I just think that a lot of the things that I just really wish, kind of going back forward and ask my question to that person would be even, man, how do I be more confident in myself when I feel I struggle with insecurities or unworthiness, because you just don't know my background, or maybe I have church hurt or anything like that. And so how am I supposed to be confident in my calling? I really wish I would ask that question, how to be confident in my calling.
That's great, man. I love how you started off by saying not taking yourself so seriously. And when especially when we compare, it makes you feel like you're doing something wrong. It feeds that imposter syndrome that you're just like you're just pretending to be a minister when you compare to other people. And
correct.
And like how to be confident where you're at in your season. It's like, I feel like for me too, I really relate in the sense of so many times I'd be the youngest person in the room with all of these other ministry leaders, these other pastors. Even now, as a senior pastor of a church, I'm often the youngest one in the room, and people usually think I'm the youth pastor at some other church. And it's about like understanding where you're at. Like, hey, I'm just getting started. Like it's okay for me to not know what I don't know. And I'm just to be humble enough to figure things out, and not thinking that you have to wear this label of like being anything that you're in for over 10 years. You are technically a professional, but it's like after 13 years, I don't necessarily always feel like a professional.
No,
it's like there's times where people are like, wow, your stuff looks really good. It looks excellent. I'm like, oh, thanks. I like barely found that a way to put that together. It's really just about allowing yourself to be confident with whatever season you're at, and not trying to compare, not trying to believe that you're just always supposed to be at 3 steps ahead and that you're behind. Just really owning like whatever stage you're in, and just knowing that on your journey you're going to get there. Like you'll get to where you want to be if you continue to grow yourself, continue to work on yourself. But if you continue to like self-sabotage by filling your mind with that imposter syndrome, you're gonna. What I find is that most young leaders end up quitting because they're so that confidence is such a struggle. That imposter syndrome is so real that they quit before they can ever become great. It's like I feel like most people are pretty good, on a basic level. It's like you're good enough, and they want to be great before they have the experience to be great. And just like, man, you're just really hitting it, just really not taking yourself so serious. I love that. And so more on a practical level, say I feel like you give really good advice for someone's mind to be right, for their heart to be right. You're giving great advice. What kind of advice would you give to someone like just starting out on a practical level, whether it's like they're a young leader? How can they grow themselves in practical ways?
Man, I just started learning this in 2020. I read it through a book called Emotionally Healthy Leader by Pastor Pete Scazzero. There's so much power in investing in yourself. It's nobody else's responsibility than yours. And so for me, I would challenge you to develop yourself. Maybe you have calling to be in a certain position to ministry or an organization, but it doesn't mean you can't prepare for it. So the biggest thing for me where I would start is first start with yourself. And for me, the things that I work on practically is 3 things. Hey, how's my physical life? Am I exercising? What am I eating? I know that sounds kind of crazy or anything like that, but I feel like that's important. You need to learn to be healthy. The second one is, how's your mental life? Hey, what am I investing in right now? What books am I reading? What podcasts? I'm a big podcaster. In a smaller city where I'm at, there's not really a variety of mentors like San Antonio and all these bigger cities and things like that. So I've had to learn the power of personal investment in myself, physically, mentally, and even spiritually. How's my devotional life look like? How's my Bible reading? How's my prayer time? Because I feel like that is important for us as leaders to be, because we could not give on an empty cup. And I feel like a lot of the times we think, oh, I just need to go, I need to serve. And I think sometimes it's okay to be a little bit selfish and invest in yourself. And for me, this season for me is a little bit more different. Now I'm married now and things like that. So I'm like, God, like now I have to learn to really take care of myself, because like, hey, I can't bring the baggage of, that sounded really bad, but the baggage of ministry, or the things that happens, into my marriage now. I want to keep ministry with ministry and marriage, and I'm going to be there mentally. But I would really say, do not despise really taking the discipline of those three things of, hey, where's my mental health, my spiritual health, and my physical health? And I feel like that's something that's done in secret that nobody will know, but I'm telling you, it'll pay off and the reward will come over time.
Yeah, that's so good. And I feel like all those three things really help work on your emotional health too. It's like
Yeah.
even just like working out, it really helps you to
Yeah.
emotionally handle yourself, and kind of like thinking backwards
Yeah.
to what you said, like the spiritual health. I feel like I was surprised at the lack of spiritual devotion I would see in other leaders in ministry. And
Yeah.
I think that it's almost like surprising, because at first glance you think like, well, of course that like you're going to be spiritually devoted, that's what like your job.
Yeah.
But
Yeah.
I think a lot of leaders, once they get started, they get almost like surprised of how much practical work
Yeah.
goes into organizing and preparing a message. And even for me, like just preparing a
Yeah.
message, not even the organizational part about preparing volunteers and communicating with people and planning, but even just like preparing a message, it can often turn
Yeah.
into a very like non-spiritual job, to where
Yeah.
there's been entire messages where I'd create and I felt like it was just I just created like a historical accounts like I just created like a fact sheet, and I didn't really create a spiritual message. And it was because I was not tapping into that spiritual devotion. And there's been times where I
Mhm.
throw out like the entire I spent like 4 hours on it. I was like, dude, this is crap. And I'll just throw it out. I just felt like wrong providing something that was just not, that didn't have the spiritual part. And then I would like, instead
Yeah.
of, I would have a mind shift, and I would say, instead of me trying to appear smart, appear like I know everything, let me just,
Yeah.
instead of taking all this time to research and study, let me actually just take that same amount of time to pray and worship
Mhm.
instead, and then
Yeah.
go back to it. And I would like kind of have this reset moment and go into prayer and worship. And after that time, I feel like it would just like flow through me. And it's like I
Yeah.
would get so much more like a spiritual, powerful message from just trusting in the Holy Spirit through that prayer and worship
Yeah.
than when I was trying to research and appear smart by. And don't get me wrong, like it's great to study and research,
Yeah.
like that's all applicable, but I feel like it flows so much better when you have that spiritual health. And then
Yeah.
going into the, how you were talking about the mental health, it's like we get so caught up in our heads, like what you're talking about before, the imposter
Yeah.
syndrome, the confidence. And even when you start thinking about like, I wonder if these people are talking bad about me, I wonder, it's like there's so much gossip that grows
Yeah.
in within churches and ministry, I mean any workplace. But it's like
Correct.
even mentally, you could start, it could start seeping into everything else when you have like these negative this negative attitude, this negative
Yeah.
thought life. And even for like leadership, when you develop, when you allow yourself to take that natural course of negativity, like that,
Yeah.
we're cynical at heart. I feel like most people are, we're naturally pessimistic, we're naturally
Yeah.
depressed. And so when you allow that to be your attitude, I mean, it just gets communicated to the rest of
Yeah.
everybody else. It's like when you're disappointed or discouraged within ministry, when you're
Yeah.
making an announcement for the church, you're just like, well, I mean, this is just what we have to do. It sucks, and
Yeah.
I don't know what we're gonna do after this. It's like you like no hope.
Yeah.
It's like you lose that the ability to communicate effectively
Yeah.
and to inspire when your mind is not right. And the
Yeah.
physical health, I mean, shoot. I feel like the older I get, the more and more I'm just like, I don't know, maybe I don't want to hold this to be that important. But our physical health, I mean,
Yeah.
even like the philosophers of Plato's day, they were athletes, they were Olympians, and they have created so much philosophical ideas based off of how your mind reacts to your body. And just
Yeah.
having like the right physical health, will compel you to have the right mental health, the right
For
spiritual
sure.
health. But when, even just like with sleep, that's a physical health thing. And if you're staying up all night just, playing games or chilling or doing whatever, you're not going
Yeah.
to get up in time to have that spiritual devotion.
Yeah, no.
It's like that physical health is really about learning like a disciplined lifestyle in just a simple, healthy sense. Like when I eat
Yeah,
nasty, I just feel like it affects the rest of me. It affects
for
the rest of my
sure.
day. And it literally affects like my lethargicness or energy of when it comes time to do the spiritual stuff, and
Yeah.
let alone like having to like perform and do a message and actually have the heart to it. It really takes a physical level to
Yeah.
demonstrate and like project a message to people in a way that can inspire. I could say the exact same message without good physical health and just monotone without any enunciation. And
Yeah.
even though it's totally spiritual, I could say the exact same things. It will be less received. And if we want to take ministry seriously, we should try our very best, be good stewards. And when
Yeah.
I have like the physical momentum to like give it all I got, that message within that ministry time, it's like received exponentially. And God uses all parts of our lives to be able
Yeah.
to minister to these people. So I love how you just gave this
Yeah.
great, well-rounded idea of how to work. One can start just really taking themselves. I like how you said, like, don't take yourself so seriously. And
Yeah.
this is like the idea of taking yourself seriously, but in the
Correct.
sense of being disciplined and
Correct.
getting your life in order. That's great. Let me ask you one last question before we wrap up today, and that is, what is the greatest change that you've made as a leader?
The
That's a big one.
greatest change. Um, I feel the greatest change that I have made as a leader is one thing that I just recently started getting. A mentor came into my life again, Heda, and I feel like the biggest thing that he's really taught me and what I've really changed. I feel like it kind of goes on the spiritual side of how your devotional life and reading and prayer is. Don't estimate the power of rest. I feel like rest was important for me. That really helped me as a leader because I feel like we live in this hustle culture. We got to go, 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 go. We got to do more for the kingdom of God. We got to do more. We got to do more. But rest doesn't mean just binging Netflix and video games and things like that. But taking rest as, you know what, I'm just gonna sit and just listen to what God wants to say.
Yeah.
And I feel like those are moments for me that has really changed my life because I guess you'd pause with a purpose instead of being distracted of, oh man, I got to work on this tomorrow. I got to do this. You know what? I'm just going to forget about everything else. I'm going to enjoy this moment and I'm just going to rest. And I feel like because of that, I've been able to work out of rest and not out of reaction because of, oh man, I just got to do that. I got to do that. And then what happens for me is I begin to overthink. And I'm like, no, sometimes I have to literally shut my mind up because I'm a thinker. Like my body can be rested, but my mind will keep racing and going. I have to do this. I got to do this. But then when I come to rest, I can just say, you know what, God, I put it all on you and everything's going to be okay. And I feel like that has really changed the area of the way I work in ministry and not taking my time of prayer because of, God, well, I need you to pray because I need you to bless my ministry. But God, you know what? I want to take time because I'm your son. I am your son. And because of those times of rest, I've been able to understand that there's something powerful knowing that I am God's son and I can work under his approval and not a man's. And that has really helped me to understand that through a time of rest for me.
That's so powerful. And I feel like even as you're talking about rest, I feel like for the longest time for me, when I would hear leaders talk about rest, I feel like I would get this misunderstanding about it, this misconception, and thinking that you just need to do less. You just need to do less. And the way that you're talking about it is almost like the times where like you have a big decision and you need to just like rest on it. And like even for me recently, I had this really life-changing opportunity that I was trying to decide whether or not I should take this opportunity or if it wasn't for me. and it was gonna affect my life, my family's life, my marriage, my church, my ministry. Is like a really big decision, and I feel like just a couple years ago, I would have made the decision by the end of the day, or maybe the next. If I really was like, oh,
Yeah.
I'm gonna rest, I would make it the next day, and it was just it's. I feel like this is the first time for me. I like really let it rest in my heart, rest in
Yeah.
my spirit, rest in my mind, and I took over a week of just like really waiting on it and praying about it. And one day I would act as if I was going to take the opportunity. And the next day I would
Yeah.
act as if I wasn't going to take the opportunity.
Mm.
And rather than just being like this tornado of emotions and
Yeah.
curiosity and like, oh, well, what if I do this? But what if this happens? What if? And you get like restless when you're just like so focused and so not even focused, but like just like this tornado of
Yeah.
thoughts about this one thing. And man, just resting about it. And there'd be some days where I was like, you know what? I think I should just take the opportunity. And then the next
Yeah.
day, I would feel the exact opposite. And I was like, man, see, I need to take more time to rest on this. I'm
Yeah.
not decided on it. And I feel like for even just like acknowledging for anyone who's listening too, I think that it must be accounted of like what season we're into. Like when
Correct.
you look at you're
Correct.
13 years in ministry. It's not like you just started. Even though oftentimes I feel like even for me when I'm
Yeah.
like,
Just like it was
I've been a
yesterday.
church planter. I realized even on our website for our church, it was like we're a new church. I was like, well, we're actually a 5-year-old church now. It's like that 5 years goes by so fast. We still
Yeah.
feel like we're just getting started sometimes, but you've been in ministry for 13 years and now you're realizing this different level of rest. I think for anyone listening to this that they should recognize what stage they're in, because I think
Correct.
that at the beginning of ministry, I think a lot of leaders misinterpret, a lot of young leaders,
Yeah.
who are just starting out, they misinterpret what that rest means.
Correct.
And they think that they should be saying no to things or a lot
Yeah.
more than they should. It's like, I feel like when you're just starting out, it's almost like you need to be tenacious. You need to
Yeah.
be aggressive in getting
Correct.
something off the ground. And it's after you get something established where you have to
Yeah.
realize like I need to take a step back. Like times
Correct.
for me, I'll find myself, I put my kids down, I've already been working all day, and I'll tell myself I'm gonna just work on this one last thing. It's 8 o'clock at night. I'm gonna just do this for an hour and I'll
Yeah.
be done. And all of a sudden my wife's like kicking me saying, when are you gonna get up? It's time for bed. I look, it's 12 o'clock at night. I'm like, oh man, I just where did the time go? It's like now I'm just like
Yeah.
you. It's like I need to rest because I'm gonna go crazy. But it's like when you're
Yeah.
just getting started out, it's like you need so much tenacity, you need so much
Correct.
aggressiveness. I think about even like with you when you first started out ministry, like you went to a ministry right after high school, you go through a ministry internship to where 5 days a week you were
Yeah.
going to on campus, on site clubs at middle schools, high schools, and you're
Yeah.
ministering at 6 in the morning, in the afternoon. Then you're going to class, and then you have your own job, and
Yeah.
you're just like grinding and grinding. And then you finally finish this time, and you're like, all right, now I'm gonna go to school, and you go through your associates, and all the while you're not only just serving in the church where you're required of, but I
Yeah.
remember you even when it's like exasperated ministry and we're scheduled to volunteer at this big
Yeah.
mega church, to volunteer at the 11 o'clock service, you
Yeah.
would go to the 9 a.m. service just to go, like
Yeah.
just to be a part of the service, to see if there's any other help.
Yeah.
It's like you were so like you were just on
Yeah.
it and grinding in ministry. And I feel like when you're just starting out, like so many young people think that they need to just kind of sit back and just wait for people to notice how great they are. It's like,
Yeah.
no, like most of it is just like you show up, you just keep showing up, and people are like,
Correct.
hey, where's so and so? I don't know, but this guy keeps showing up. I feel like that's how I became
Yeah.
a youth pastor. It's just like I
Yeah.
just kept showing up to set up chairs, and they just couldn't get rid of me. As I was showing up in the parking lot, I was showing up in the youth department, I was showing up in all these areas to serve. And it's like, well,
Yeah.
just put them somewhere. It's like
Yeah.
it's so many young leaders, they just do the opposite. And they're like, well, I heard
Correct.
this message about rest, And so I just don't want to overwhelm myself. I don't want to do too
Yeah.
much because I have a part-time job that I work 20 hours a week at. And
Yeah.
so I can't make it to church this week. It's like that's fine if you want to do that, but don't
Yeah.
think that you're going to get any advancement in
Correct.
ministry leadership by putting in the back burner. Like it's almost like in a sense like you earn that rest. I feel like after
Yeah.
13 years, like that's when you just start to pass the cusp of like
Yeah.
earning that rest where like you need to because now you've created something stable. And once you create
Yeah.
that stability, it's like, okay, now I need to rest so I can keep this alive. Makes me think
Yeah.
about kids. Like when I first have kids, like you get that baby, there's no rest at all. There's no rest whatsoever. They tell you sleep when the baby sleeps. That's impossible. It's like all night you're up, and it's so restless when you have
Yeah.
something newly birthed. But over time, it's like now my oldest two kids just started going to pre-K, and I was like, oh my gosh, like I couldn't take a nap in the middle of the day. Like sometimes, not all the time. I'm usually, still busy, but it's like there's times where like I really want to continue doing work and I have to just
Yeah.
do what you said and like sit back and like, you know what? I'm gonna burn out if I don't
Yeah.
rest today. I'm gonna burn out if I don't take a nap. Like and I feel like that's what you're talking about. It's like
Correct.
I've had the babies though. I've had the babies that don't sleep. I've been
Yeah.
grind. There's all the nights of not sleeping at all. So it's like I've earned this moment to have a nap.
Yeah.
And so I love how you said that and just like identifying like where you're at in that rest
Yeah.
and how like really you will burn out once
Yeah.
you're work. It requires work to be in a
Correct.
place of burnout. And in
Correct.
that place of burnout, if you don't rest, like you will burn out. And I think even like now that I'm getting older, I like physically have had burnout to where all of a sudden like my
For
eyes stop
sure.
working. It's like, whoa, like I
Yep.
can't see straight. And it's because of being physically exhausted from work. And like my legs are giving out. Like I'm having
Yeah.
like not a panic attack, but it's like my body is like, you're
Yeah.
gonna shut down right now because you need a rest. And so many people they think about resting before ever getting close to that spot.
Big time.
But rest is so important, so important. I love that, and it's to know that that was the greatest change you made as a leader. There's a moment that you got to that place and realize, okay, there's a transition I need to make as a leader if I'm going to keep making it. That's
Yeah.
great, man. Do you have any last thoughts about what we're talking about today before we wrap up? Any final closing remarks that you want to share with anyone?
Um, Closing remarks. Other than, yeah, rest is important.
Yeah,
Because you just reminded me of somebody who just recently, so at our church we have a thing called hub groups. Those are small groups. And this girl came up to me and she just started saying, hey, I'm going to be leading a group, but I also want to be attending this group and helping this person. And in my mind, I was like, I shared with her, and I just said, like, hey, just make sure you're not doing too much. But I just feel like what rest is saying, I'm going to take a day out of my week to just spend time with God. Almost
yeah,
like a boundary, like, hey, this is untouchable. I want to take a moment to just spend time with God, do some hobbies that I love, to just, I guess, self-therapy.
yeah,
For me, that's, I'm going to run and things like that. But then when I shared with her that, and it was during our 20 days of prayer and fasting this year, and I was like, in my mind, I felt God shared with me, but I don't want to discourage this leader by telling her that, because she may have a calling to ministry. And
yeah,
so I eventually went back to her and I said, hey, if you feel this is the thing to do, I'm not going to discourage you. And I think
yeah,
that it is so important for leaders to know your seasons, because
yeah,
I really felt like, man, I could have easily discouraged her and saying, you know what, hey, you're just doing too much. You just need to rest, rest, rest. But
mm,
sometimes it's important to understand that, hey, I have a calling, and this is where I feel like this season, like for me, I was in a season of rest, but right now I feel like my season is transitioning of, hey, now it's time to go. Okay, your
yeah,
season of rest, it's good and everything. The Bible talks, I think it's Ecclesiastes, how there's seasons to do different things.
yeah,
And I feel like it is important to also understand there's also seasons of sowing, seasons of giving, and I'm like, who am I to stand in the way of a person's calling? you know? And so I'm like, man, what can I do to really help people? And I think that that is important to understand. If you're a leader and you're saying, hey, you know what, maybe my season right now is, hey, maybe not to rest, but I would just say, hey, try to find
Yeah.
at least a day to just say, not just say, oh, I just can't show up to church because I'm resting. No, church is not a
Yeah.
burden. It's a place of community.
Yeah.
You know, and I've seen people do that. Oh, I just need to distance myself from the church. No, like, dude, that's the place where you get to meet with God's
Yeah.
people and meet with God, you know, and I've seen that happen. But really, I would say take that seriously and don't despise the process of where you're in. Because I feel like a lot of times as young leaders, and I'm even guilty of it as well, is we know this big calling that God has for our life, but then we begin to compare ourselves with other people. I'm like, man, well, God, how come you're elevating them? But I just
Mm.
reminded of David. David was anointed to become king, but we often see the point A and point B. The point where I got called, and the second part, point B, would be, you know what, now he's the king. But nobody saw
Yeah.
the seasons of what he went through. And those
Yeah.
seasons are moments where we are to say, you know what, God, what can I learn other than, you know what, God, I'm just tired of church. They're not noticing me. They're not looking at me. Man, maybe I should try something else. It's like, no, like sometimes seasons are dirty. You know,
Yeah.
there's seasons that are great seasons, there's hard seasons, but hey, we don't quit, we don't give up.
Yeah. That's so good, man. I love ending on that note, the thought of knowing what season you're in. Are you in the season to work on yourself, prepare yourself?
Yeah,
And maybe like you need to have a season where you really just like working on your relationship and understanding of God.
yeah,
Maybe it's a season for you to grind. It's your season to grind and
yeah,
grind and grind. And maybe you're entering a season of rest where you're right on the cusp of
right,
burnout, and God is like, all right, now that you worked so hard, like
yeah,
let's take a moment. So I love that, Eric. Thank you so much for speaking
yeah,
with us
man.
today and being on this podcast. Where can people find you if they want to follow you online?
Uh, you can find me, man. My Instagram is at the Fields. So I don't know. That's the only
At
place I
the
have
Fields.
Facebook at the Fields, and things like that. And you can see a little bit what we're doing here in a small city called Del Rio, Texas. And also, Homer, thank you so much for the opportunity, man. I'm inspired with your faith and your ability to say, hey, I'm willing to leave everything in a small city to go start something great, man. And I think it's something totally boss when you're the youngest person in the room, because I really feel like, hey, when other people were comfortable, you decided to stand out and just to show up and to be daring to believe in God. And I truly believe that God's gonna honor for you for that, man. So
Well,
thank
you're making me
you.
feel bashful. You're very flattering. Thanks, Eric. Thank you for your support. And I'll be sure to put your at name in the show notes. At the Fields on Instagram. That's where Eric is usually most active. But thank you so much, man. You have a great rest of your day.
Yeah, man. You too.
And everyone
All right,
listening,
see ya.
have a good yeah, everyone listening, have a good life.